1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome back to the Hauntological Society again. Take two. Welcome to the season of the witch. I am Eric. I am your witch with the bubble cauldron. And with me, as always,
Wendy.
I want Derek
My
to your
game
witch.
show, dating show music.
I always think of it as like slow jazz. Welcome to the season of the witch, our spooky themed episodes coming at you all the way up until Halloween. Last week we talked about the Virginia witch trials. Today we're going to talk about Connecticut. They're not as friendly as they are in Virginia.
This is take two.
This is take two. I forgot to press the correct button on the recording, and it messed our recording up. Nobody's fault but mine.
We sound very warbly.
Yeah, it did not sound good. I guess starting off, what about that? We talked about this. What about that rake video I showed you?
Pretty fucking creepy. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah. So I found a video. It was like a Facebook reel, and it was a guy calling 911. And at first, this is what's weird. He first starts off saying he's driving by an old battlefield, and he sees a guy standing in the ditch wearing bloody clothes with blood all over him. And so he calls and tells 911 that he saw a person covered in blood on the side of the road. And this is in the middle of the night, by the way. And
thinks they need help.
Mm-hmm. And then they disappeared. And then he realizes that something jumps in the back of his truck. And he looks and he's like, it's not human. And then later on, I found a YouTube video of the same guy. And he starts describing what sounds like a rake. And if you don't know what a rake is, they're like a white, naked, pale kind of body creature with sunken sort of red eyes and
creepy.
Usually kind of crouched down, kind of walks spider-like. Very creepy looking. If you're interested in that, go check out our Facebook page. It's on the Facebook page and the group. And in the comments, I posted the YouTube video so you can watch both of them. But it's really crazy that it takes place here in North Carolina. All right. Second of all, at the end of this episode, don't forget to stick around because we have some music from Bobby Snakes, good friend of mine. He writes and produces all of his music. He is a member of probably like 12 bands, I think. He's just super talented all around. So please hang around, check out his music. Thank you to Bobby for letting me play one of his songs on our podcast. Also, thank you to the Bleach Boys and Table Rock and Rollers for also submitting songs. And next week we have one more song for you from a band called the Sycamore Bones. I don't know them personally, but they reached out to us, and here they are. They'll be next after this. So
he is literally in 12 different bands, or he has collectively been in those many bands.
He's got a lot of bands. He does a lot of stuff.
So he just plays with a bunch of different people. Is that what you mean?
Well, I think he's got one main one that he's doing now. I don't know specifically he's in 12 bands, but he is in a lot of bands. He's played in all kinds of different ones. Very talented guy.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, good dude. So check him out, and then make sure you go check out his Facebook page and all that good shit, because he's putting out music all the fucking time. All right, well, since we're in the season of the witch, I guess we will start talking about some witches. Like I said before, today we're going to Connecticut, and Connecticut is not the kind state that Virginia was. I guess Virginia had that Southern hospitality. Connecticut's still carrying the Puritan laws. So,
damn Puritans.
Always getting you. All right. So without further ado, I guess, welcome to the Connecticut witch trials.
On with the story.
Let's do it. Now, Connecticut in the early 1600s, in the early 17th century, which is the same thing, the Connecticut River Valley was still very much a raw and dangerous frontier. The English Puritans had broken away from the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and in the 1630s, came here seeking stricter religious discipline and fresh land. They built settlements like Hartford, Wethersfield, and Windsor, small clusters of timber-framed houses surrounded by dense forests that seemed endless and alien to European eyes. Life here was precarious. The Pequot War of 1636 to 1638 had left deep scars. Epidemics swept through the settlements. Harsh winters could wipe out food stores, and wolves prowled the edges of the cleared fields. By the way, if you hear me clanking around, I do have another cough drop in my mouth. Even though I do sound better, I still have a cough drop and try not to break off into a hacking fit. The Puritan mindset saw the devil's hand in every misfortune, from a sudden fever to a poor harvest, and believed that Satan's agents could be walking among them in the form of witches. Now, unlike Massachusetts, which would make witchcraft infamous decades later, Connecticut's leaders were ready to enforce England's 1604 Witchcraft Act with zeal. The Bible was clear to them. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. The Witchcraft Act of 1604 was a law passed in England during the reign of King James I, the same king who sponsored the King James Bible. It replaced and expanded earlier Tudor laws against witchcraft, and it reflected the growing fear of witches and the supernatural in early 17th century England. Then the background of that Witchcraft Act is under the Witchcraft Act of 1563, passed under Elizabeth I, witchcraft was considered a crime, but the death penalty only applied if someone was proven to have killed another person through sorcery. Lesser magical practices often led to imprisonment, but by 1604, King James I, who had a personal fascination and fear of witchcraft, he even wrote a book called Demonology, wanted stricter measures. So in 1604, the act made it a capital offense, punishable by death, to invoke evil spirits or to use witchcraft in ways that were thought to harm others, not only physically, but spiritually. Under the Elizabethan law, it extended the death penalty to those who were believed to have conjured or communed with evil or demonic forces. Even if no physical harm resulted, lesser forms of sorcery, charms, or fortune telling could still result in imprisonment or execution, depending on the severity. This act significantly fueled witch trials in England and Scotland during the 17th century, and it was the law under which many of the famous English witch trials took place, including those associated with Matthew Hopkins, the self-styled witch-finder general in the 1640s. The act stayed in force until 1736, when it was repealed and replaced by a new law that treated belief in witchcraft as fraud rather than a capital crime. So, before the storm in Connecticut, in the year of 1647, the Connecticut River Valley was gripped by a sickness that moved like a shadow over the land. They called it the violet cold, but it was an influenza, a fever that burned through homes in Windsor, Hartford, and Wethersfield, sparing neither the old nor the young. It came suddenly. One day, a person would be mending a fence or tending to the hearth. The next, they were racked with cough. Their skin was hot to the touch. Their breath was shallow. Death followed quickly. Too quickly for the living to understand. And in Puritan eyes, such calamities were never random. These were signs, warnings from God that his covenant and the community had been broken. And if God's wrath had fallen, there must be a reason. There must be someone to blame. It began quietly, like a change in the weather. A cough here, a fever there. But within a few weeks, the sickness had a grip on every settlement along the Connecticut River. And in Hartford, Windsor, and Wethersfield, entire families took to their beds. Physicians of the day, a mix of ministers, midwives, and the occasional trained surgeon, called it the violet cold or the catarrh. But what was swept through the colony was far more deadly. It was influenza, likely the same wave that had torn through Europe the year before and arrived in New England aboard merchant ships. The symptoms came on suddenly, chills that rattled the bones, a crushing weakness that made lifting a cup impossible, and a cough so deep it seemed to shake the soul loose from the body. Fever burned the skin hot to the touch. and in some the heat gave way to a terrible stillness within the days. Infants and elderly were struck hardest, though no age was truly safe. Without understanding germs or contagion, the Puritans saw only the pattern: death moving from house to house with a speed and purpose that felt almost inhuman. Neighbors who had spoken together at the market on Monday might be buried by Friday. So the questions began. Why had God allowed this? What sin had cracked the covenant and let the devil in? In Puritan thought, such disasters did not arrive without a cause. And if God's wrath had fallen, it must have been invited by someone in league with the enemy. It was in this climax of grief, fear, and suspicion that the name Elsa Young began to pass from mouth to mouth. When a scapegoat was needed, she was standing alone at the edge of the crowd. Her name, Elsa Young, we do not know her face, her voice, or even her exact age. She lived in Windsor, likely the wife of a carpenter named John Young. She was not wealthy, nor politically connected, and in 17th century Connecticut, that meant she stood alone if suspicion came calling. Some whispered that she had brought misfortune before. Perhaps her family had been struck by illness, or her neighbors' crops had failed. Whatever the gossip, the influenza outbreak gave it new and deadly weight. He had to be cast out before God's anger consumed them all. On May 26, 1647, Elsa Young was led to Harvard's Meeting House Square. By the way, here's a little trigger warning because we're talking about witches. Unfortunately, we're going to mention some hangings. And so here's your trigger warning for that. Elsa Young was led to Harvard's Meeting House Square. The gallows was a rough timber frame. There would be no drop to break her neck, only the slow tightening of the rope as the cart beneath her pulled away. Townsfolk gathered, some to pray, some to watch. Reverend Matthew Grant recorded her death in his diary with a chilling brevity. Elsa Young was hanged. Her body hung in the spring air, the first person in the American colonies to be executed for witchcraft, but the sickness did not stop. Now, before the trials, the colony itself was still young, carved from wilderness by English Puritans who had left Massachusetts in the 1630s, seeking stricter religious discipline. Settlements like Hartford, Windsor, and Weatherford were surrounded by dense forests, haunted by the memory of recent wars with the Pequot and the lingering threat of famine. Life here was a daily negotiation with hardship. Wolves prowled the outskirts of farms, harvests could fail without warning, and illness could race entire families in a season. For the Puritans, every danger was a test of faith, and every misfortune was a possible mark of the devil's handiwork. But the execution of Elsa Young did not end Connecticut's fears. It confirmed them. If one witch could be rooted out, others might still be hiding. The colonies had learned its first terrible lesson. Where the devil's presence was suspected, the rope was always ready. Now, before Hartford streets filled with whispers and gallows claimed its infamous harvest, Connecticut's appetite for witch trials had already been whetted. These early cases, smaller in scale, but steeped in superstition, set the tone for the grim decades to come. Mary was a servant in the small but growing settlement of Weathersford, where gossip traveled faster than the wind along the Connecticut River. Accused first of petty theft, she was questioned by Reverend Samuel Stone, a man skilled in extracting confessions as he was in delivering sermons. Imagine his interrogation methods were probably
Pretty raw.
Her interrogation stretched on, a blur of scripture and suspicion, until her story shifted from stolen goods to stolen souls. She admitted a lascivious conduct and finally to witchcraft. Her words were punctuated with disturbing images: a black figure visiting her in the night, promises whispered in her ear to ease her burden, and unnatural strength gained in moments of weakness. We will never know how much of her confession was truth, fear, or the result of exhaustion from coercion. But in 1648, her fate was sealed. She became the first in Connecticut to confess to witchcraft, and one of the first to hang for it. Now, Elizabeth Seeger was from Wethersfield. Her story unfolded over multiple accusations, making her one of Connecticut's most persistent targets. Neighbors swore she could spoil butter with a glance, that she was seen in the company of spectral cats, and that she whispered to shadows no one else could see.
How'd you spoil butter?
That's a good question. I don't know, but I've sure seen you melt some butter.
Yeah.
One woman claimed she saw Elizabeth vanish from the road in broad daylight, leaving nothing but the sound of laughter. Though she was tried 3 times for witchcraft, the evidence, even by 17th century standards, was inconsistent, and she ultimately escaped the news. But her repeated trials kept alive the notion that witches could hide in plain sight for years. Then we have Catherine Harrison. Catherine's trials reads like a case study in envy and fear. A wealthy widow, she was an anomaly in society where women were expected to depend on men for status and security. She had her own servants, fine furnishings, and the means to live without remarrying, which was enough to point her as suspicious. So she was a strong, independent woman, and so therefore she was a witch.
Didn't need a man.
Didn't need a man, therefore she's a witch. Witnesses lined up to testify against her. A servant swore that she had seen a green light inside Catherine's home and heard voices when no one else was present. Another claimed a dark, man-like figure stood in her doorway. There were reports of spoiled milk, inexplicable illness, and even the devil himself visiting her. I'm sorry, I'm sure her refrigerator wasn't working, so her milk probably spoiled.
Right. And her servant?
Mm-hmm.
Her servant saw the green light and spread the gossip.
Mm-hmm.
What a bitch.
She was probably pissed off.
Probably jealous, salty.
Though she was convicted, though, the courts wavered. Some magistrates questioned whether the evidence was strong enough to justify execution. Catherine was instead banished instead of hanged. Yet, living out her years in Westchester, her case showed that even in the 1660s, there were cracks forming in Connecticut's willingness to kill without question. So, during all this time, there was a cluster of outbreaks and accusations in Wethersfield called the Wethersfield Cluster. And it seemed like Wethersfield was a lightning rod for suspicion. Over the years, a cluster of accusations emerged there, with residents claiming to see strange lights, hear unexplained knocks at their doors, and find livestock without cause. I wonder if it's like little kids doing like
Ding dong ditch.
knock knock ditch,
Yeah.
or like, what if they had like little candles that they were like projecting light into the windows, which could
Right.
also make shadow people on the wall could be the dark figure they see.
Idiocracy
Yeah,
at
it's
its
finest.
finest. Yep. Great minds think alike.
The town's proximity to the river, a lifeline for trade but also a source of isolation during winter, seemed to make it a fertile ground for rumors. Every misfortune found a supernatural scapegoat. So when the winter hit and they were left alone, the rumors began to swirl.
Couldn't get out and about and talk
Yeah.
shit, so they made stuff up at home.
When the ground's frozen, the tongues will wag. These early trials were a mix of confession under duress, spectral visions, and petty grievances magnified by fear. Taught Connecticut's courts how to prosecute witches, but more importantly, taught the people that once suspicion took hold, it could strip away a neighbor's humanity and time that it took to tell a story by the fire. So while these trials were going on in the mid-1600s, Connecticut was already showing that it was willing to hang those accused of witchcraft, but the Hartford witch panic marked its bloodiest chapter. It began quietly with the mysterious illness of an 8-year-old girl named Elizabeth Kelly. On her deathbed, she reportedly named her tormentors, and in Puritan New England, the words of dying were sacred truth. The community's theology turned her accusations into a divine warning. Puritans believed the devil was not a metaphor, but a living, breathing enemy who walked the earth, recruiting agents to destroy God's people. If witches were active in Hartford, the entire town's covenant with God was in jeopardy. To fail to act would bring divine punishment on everyone. So once the accusations began, they spread like wildfire under a thatched roof. The courts relied heavily on spectral evidence, claims that the accused had appeared in dreams or visions, harming witnesses in invisible form. Some afflicted townsfolk would convulse and cry out in court, pointing to empty air and insisting they saw the accused standing beside them in spirit, whispering curses. Rebecca Greensmith's trial became the centerpiece of the hysteria. Witnesses swore they had seen her dancing in the woods with a tall black man, possibly her shadow, whose eyes glowed like embers. That doesn't explain that. Once even claimed to see a shadowy figure standing behind her during questioning. Under intense pressure, she confessed to meeting the devil and named others she claimed had joined her. Each name pulled more people into the web. So she didn't want to be alone, so she just started pointing fingers at everybody.
Oh, yeah. Well, if they're going to point fingers at me, I'm going to point them back.
The political climate only worsened in the storm. Connecticut was still securing its royal charter from King Charles II. Leaders were eager to prove their moral vigilance. Old grudges and land disputes found a deadly outlet through accusations. Women who stepped outside their prescribed roles, widows with property, outspoken neighbors, found themselves especially vulnerable. The Reverend John Whitting fanned the flames from the pulpit, preaching about the devil's assault on Hartford. Each sermon seemed to confirm the townspeople's worst fears. Witches were not just possible, they were already here. By early 1663, the panic, the panic had consumed at least 7 lives. Among them, Mary Sanford, Mary Barnes, Nathaniel and Rebecca Greensmith, and Judith Farlett. The executions came in quick succession, the gallows creaking with the weight of fear-driven justice, and then silence. The hysteria broke when accusations began to touch people of higher standing, individuals with influence who could resist the charges. Judges started demanding more tangible proof, and without it, the cases collapsed. Hartford had fed its hunger for purging evil, but at the cost of neighbors' lives and its own moral soul. And most importantly, it was pointing fingers at those less fortunate. Because once the prominent people in the town started getting their finger pointed at them, this all collapsed and ended. So I think like with this going on, a lot of these women have been forgotten over time. A lot of these women don't have markers, or place for a memorial, or an in memoriam even set up. So I think it's important to say their names so that you remember who they are. Perhaps it will help them rest in peace. And so now I would like to do the roll call of the condemned for you. Elsa Young, Mary Johnson, Joan and John Carrington, Lydia Gilbert. Now, in Hartford, this was the deadliest wave of Connecticut's witchcraft hysteria, a fever that had gripped the capital and would not loosen until the gallows had been fed. Mary Sanford said to have danced in the devil with the woods. Dance with the devil in the woods. To have attended midnight merry meetings and others with her kind. She was hanged in 1662, her name forever bound to Hartford's season of shadows. Rebecca and Nathaniel Greensmith were a married couple whose downfall came with Rebecca's haunting confession. She told of a meeting of the devil in the forest, a tall black man with eyes like coals, and of feasts and dances under the trees. Whether these words were wrung from her by fear or planted in her mind by her accusers, we will never know. But both were hanged on the cold day in January 1663. I keep wanting to say 19.
Well,
Mary Barnes was swept up in the panic, accused of afflicting her neighbors with a strange illness. Her trial was largely lost, but she hanged alongside the Greensmiths. 3 bodies were swaying together in the winter air. And Judith Farlett, accused of killing a child and ruining crops. Witnesses swore they had seen her specter attacking livestock. She was hanged before the year's panic burned itself out. Now, these executions were not quick. They were not easy. The gallows were made crude. timber frame or a cart with a cart or ladder beneath. The noose was placed and the cart pulled away. The body was left to twist in the wind. Townsfolk gathered to watch. Ministers prayed along for the soul, even as the life was being taken away. Children clutched their mother's skirts, and some would later swear they saw shadows moving along the trees as the bodies hung. This was the true face of Connecticut's witch trials. Not just parchment and ink, but flesh and rope, spear and spectacle. Community's faith sharpened into a weapon, striking down neighbor after neighbor. By the late 1690s, Connecticut's courts began to acquire more tangible proof of the witchcraft. This shift was partly due to growing skepticism after the excesses of the Salem trials, 1692. No executions for witchcraft occurred in Connecticut after 1697, though the laws remained on the books. And it wasn't until 2017 that the state legislature finally cleared the name of Alcyone, and in 2023, a resolution symbolically exonerated all of the accused Connecticut witches. So, in Connecticut, the witch trials were not just a legal phenomenon. They were a collision of fear, faith, and the unknown. Here the devil was not an abstract theological enemy, but a real tangible threat, lurking in the forests and whispering in the dark corners of a neighbor's home. The executions were public rituals of purification, meant to exorcise evil from the community, but they left a deeper stain, a lingering reminder that fear can be dressed in robes of the righteousness. Today, the names of Connecticut's witches echo faintly in historical records, but in places where they lived and died, Hartford's Old Green, the quiet streets of Wethersfield, their presence still feels close. The same wind that rattles the shutters during the trials still blows, and one might wonder if the whispered accusations ever truly stopped, or if they're simply taking new forms. People like Alice's body was left the gallows on that gray morning, but where it went after that, no one knows. There is no stone, no marker. The churchyard records are silent. Perhaps she was lowered to the earth or on the edge of the square, buried where she dropped in the soil so they could hide the shame. Perhaps, which I would like to think, her family claimed her in secret, carrying her home under the cover of night to lay her in an unmarked plot where only they would know. The same silence hangs over others who followed her to the rope: Mary Johnson, Lydia Gilbert, Mary Sanford, Rebecca Nathaniel Greensmith, Judith Bartlett, Mary Barnes, and the Carringtons. No carved names, no dates, no epitaphs. They slipped from the scaffold into the ground and into the shadows of history. If you walk the greens of Hartford or the old lanes of Windsor, you'll find no graves to kneel before, only the wind moving through the trees, and the whisper of the footsteps that do not quite belong to you. The ground remembers what the living chose to forget. Perhaps their bones lie tangled with roots beneath the house. Perhaps the river has carried them away. Or perhaps they have no true rest at all. Their names still spoken in low voices. Their stories passed from century to century like a cold breath on the back of the neck. The Connecticut witch trials ended more than 300 years ago, but they have never truly ended. As long as fear can wear the mask of righteousness, as long as suspicion can tighten into a noose, the shadow of that gallows still falls across our time. And somewhere, Elsa Young still waits for someone to speak her name, not in judgment, but in remembrance. And that's the Connecticut witch trials.
You know, the livestock dying or whatever
Yeah.
could have been something similar to like mad cow disease.
Yeah. I mean, it could have been a number of many things.
People dying could be something similar to COVID.
Yeah.
All these things could easily be explained off with rational thinking
Absolutely.
instead of the urge to point the finger at somebody
Yeah.
to blame things on.
Exactly. All it takes is a little thought and contemplation. You know, they weren't idiots back then, so they just chose not to seek out the rational thought,
Right.
you know?
I'd had to have been an Annie Oakley or something.
Oh man. Yeah, it's a hard way to end. I really don't know any good way to like kind of bring it up because it's not really like a there's no uplifting ending to it, unfortunately. Like, it all ends in sadness, much like the Salem trials. These women are forgotten. They're gone, but hopefully not forgotten. So hopefully that one day that we will get a chance to see them again, or get to hear their names again. And so, um, like I said, this is a hard way to end this. It just doesn't change the fact that the things that happened to these women were terrible, and they lived harsh lives and ended even harder. So I just think it's good to remember those that what they went through and everything that happened to them. And I think that's all I got. So with that being said, I hope you guys hang around, listen to Bobby Snakes, do his thing because he's rocking. That'd be how we uplift this because his song kicks ass.
A whole lot of shaking going on.
A whole lot of shaking going on. So thank you once again, and we hope you come back and listen to us again. Check out our Facebook page, check out our Instagram page, check out all our social platforms, and make sure you like and review. Need those 5-star reviews to help us get more listeners. That's the most important thing. But with that being said, I am Eric.
I'm Wendy.
We're out.
By your hands I will choke. You can sail your new boat on my ocean of blood. You give me a chance, honey. Might take a second glance. You give me a chance, honey. Might take a second chance. Get all your pleasures and take a good night down. I put all my head just as I'm a chief. Bats and single guns, stretching out under the weights on the rock and roll. Broke your ravens, flocking, knocking on the front door, screaming, give me more meat before I rip out your jaw.